everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our chapter book story time. We're here at the Caribou Public Library, and I am Miss Erin. So glad that you're here with us today. We're continuing to read the book by Ralph Moody, Little Britches, and we're on chapter 15 today. So let's go ahead and see what happens next to Ralph and his family. It is called, I Give Mr. Lake a Ride. About the only fun I had the rest of that summer was the 2 times Fred Altland put up his hay. Father and I worked for him 2 weeks both times, and each time we got a check for $50. The more I herded Mrs. Corcoran's cows, the more I didn't like it. As the pasture dried up, the cows made more trouble about trying to get into the alfalfa fields. And as they got skinnier and skinnier, Mrs. Corcoran kept blaming me and saying it was because I brought them in too early or because I didn't graze them where the grass was best. Fred Altland said it was because I didn't let them get into the neighbors' crops enough to suit her. Just before school opened, she gave me fits because I brought them back to the corral one night at 5 minutes before 6. When she pinned the 35 cents into my shirt pocket, she told me that I hadn't earned half of it, and she was only giving it to me because we were so poor. We weren't poor, and I told her so, and yanked the pin out and threw the money right down by her feet. After that, she wasn't so mean and picked it up and passed it to me after I got on Fanny. I was mad all the way home, though. When I got there, Mother was feeding the hens and turkeys out beside the barn. After I pulled the bridle off Fanny so that she could go and roll, Mother asked me what the matter was. I remembered what Father had told me about forgetting what Mrs. Corcoran said and not telling anybody, so I told Mother I was mad because I didn't think I was getting paid enough for herding the cows. She put her arm around me and pulled me up against her. Then she patted me on the head and said, "Son, if you amount to as much as I think you're going to, someday you'll kick on $1.35 a day." I did tell Father about it that night when we were milking, though, and from then on I never herded Mrs. Corcoran's cows. School started about the 1st of October. Muriel was old enough to go that year, but she wasn't strong enough to walk the 1.5 miles, so Father let us drive Fanny. It wasn't a bit the way starting school should have or had been when we first came there. All the kids knew we had a horse now, and that I had ridden up to the mountains to get 2 dog, and that I had made Mrs. Corcoran pay me 35 cents a day for herding her cows. They knew, too, about Father fighting to get the irrigating water and about his fixing Fred Altland's stacker so as to make the hay fall where they wanted it. Everybody called me Spikes, and Freddie Spragg gave me half an apple at morning recess. Mr. Lake was the chairman of the school board. They said he always came for the opening day, and he always rode his old white mule. He was a little man, quite a lot older than Father, and he had big joints at the knuckles of his hands. All morning he sat up on the little platform by Miss Wheeler's desk and watched everything we did. While he was watching us, he kept pulling his fingers one at a time until he made the knuckle pop. Just when you didn't expect it, he would point at somebody and ask him to bound California, or what body of water the Mississippi River emptied into, or something else. He got me on the worst one. He pointed his finger right at me and said, "You, little tow-headed fella, go to the board and write me, pare a pear with a pair of scissors." The only 2 kinds that I knew about were pear, like the fruit, and pear, like two of something. And I got all mixed up on whether there were 2 S's or 2 Z's in scissors. He banged his head down on the desk and told Miss Wheeler she wasn't a very good teacher, or I'd know better than that. Then he told her to put me back in the 1st grade in spelling until he came again. I was pretty much ashamed of myself because we liked Miss Wheeler, and I didn't want to get her in a mess with her boss. But Grace got mad. She jumped right out of her seat and told him that it wasn't Miss Wheeler's fault because we were new there, and that I never could spell cat without a K anyway. All the good it did was that he made her stand with her face in a corner until noontime. He said that would learn her not to sass her elders. Everybody was talking about old Mr. Lake while we were eating our lunches, and Willie Aldevote dared me to sneak out in the afternoon and put a burdock burr under his saddle. I pretty near lost my nerve, but the more I looked at him, the madder I got. So halfway between recess and 4 o'clock, I put up 2 fingers, and Miss Wheeler nodded at me. Mr. Lake had a 2-cinch saddle, and I only had to loosen the back one a little bit so I could get the burr well under the middle. From then until school let out, I was so nervous I could hardly think at all. but he didn't make me answer any more questions, so I don't think he noticed me. As soon as Miss Wheeler tapped the school's out bell, we all grabbed our caps and coats and ran for the carriage shed. The old white mule was tied away over at the east end of the shed, so the boys made a big piece of work about getting their harness down and getting the straps straightened out. All the girls knew about the burr, too, and they stood around twittering and giggling and trying to look as if they didn't see Mr. Lake when he came out and put the bridle on his mule. Just as soon as he got his foot in the stirrup, the old mule went crazy. Mr. Lake let go of the reins and sat kerplunk down against the board fence, and the mule bucked so hard he'd have made a bronco look like a carriage horse. After he had the saddle slewed way over on the side of his belly, he shot right out through the turnstile gate and raced off up the road. As he went through the gate, he smashed the turnstile all to pieces and ripped the saddle off. Maybe Miss Wheeler wasn't a very good teacher, but Mr. Lake was. I learned at least a new dozen words from what he said about that old white mule. I was still shaking from being nervous, but Rudolph Haas was as cool as watercress. He went over and helped Mr. Lake get up and asked him if he couldn't drive him home in his buggy. Of course, Grace had to tell Mother all about Mr. Lake coming to school. While we were eating supper, she told about my not being able to spell pear with a pair of scissors, and about her being able to bound California. But she didn't mention having to stand with her face in the corner, or my putting the burr under Mr. Lake's saddle. The next I heard of it was 3 or 4 nights later when we were out milking. Our Holstein cow's tie-up was nearest to the barn door. Then came the brindle, so that Father's back was toward her when we were milking. Everything was quiet in the barn, except for the music milk makes when it goes down, singing into the buckets. And I was thinking about Two Dog, when Father said, "It's a dangerous thing to put a cockleburr under an old man's saddle. Mr. Lake might have been badly hurt." I just said, "Yes, sir," and Father never mentioned it again. I didn't have any more trouble at school for nearly a month, except for my glasses and the cellar door. I don't know why we had a cellar door, because there wasn't any cellar, but we did have one. It was one of those bulkhead doors that slant like a lean-to roof. Some of us were sliding down it one day when I ran a big, long splinter into my behind. It broke off inside the skin, and there was nearly an inch of it in there. Willie Aldevote tried to get it out with the little blade of his jackknife, but he couldn't, so he called Grace. She tried to get a hold of it with her fingernails, but she didn't have any more luck than Willie. Then Miss Wheeler picked at it with a needle, and finally she sent Grace and Muriel to take me home. I think Mother always did kind of like operations. She put a clean sheet over the kitchen table, dropped scissors, darning needles, and Father's whisker tweezers into a basin of boiling water to make sure they didn't have bacteria, right, to sterilize them, and rolled up her sleeves. It looked as though she were really going to do a big job, and I wasn't very happy when I shinnied up on the table. It seemed as if Mother were trying to dig clear to China. First she tried the tweezers, then she tried the darning needles, but the splinter was so rotten that all she could do was nibble away at the end of it. The more she dug, the more I bled, and the louder I yelled. Grace stood by with a strip of torn sheet to mop off the blood. Every few minutes she'd mop away my tears with the same rag and tell me that the worst would be over soon. I peeked over my shoulder once or twice. Mother's mouth was clamped up tight. It was a long operation. I must have been on the table half an hour, but it seemed like a month. At last Mother put both her hands on her hips and said, "Well, we'll just have to let nature take her course. It will fester in a day or two and come right out by itself." While she was court plastering a patch on my behind and helping me get my overalls back on, she explained to me that Mother Nature was the best surgeon of them all, and that everything would work out nicely in a couple of days. All the time she was telling me, I was wishing that she had thought of that sooner and not tried to give old Mother Nature quite so much help when she didn't need it. That splinter bothered my riding for a week or two while I waited for the fester to come and the splinter to go, but nothing happened, except that a hard little lump formed around the splinter. Once in a while, if I'd slide around quick, I remember that it's still right there. I don't know that I should tell about my glasses, because my Heavenly Father and I are the only ones who know how I lost them. Maybe the sun was too bright when I was out herding cows, or maybe I got too much hay dust in my eyes during stacking time. But anyway, as soon as I got back to school, my eyes started smarting every time I read very long. Miss Wheeler went to talk with Mother about it, and Mother took me to Denver to be fitted with glasses. It was lots of fun to peek through the little gadgets the man put over my eyes, and to have drops put in them that made everything seem as if I were looking through a rain-covered window. But I didn't like the glasses. They were silver-bowed glasses, and Mother told me I'd have to wear them all the time. I couldn't do anything where I'd be apt to get them broken, because they cost $2.25. I wore them to school 3 days. That is, I wore them every time somebody caught me and made me put them back on. The rest of the time, I kept them in my blouse pocket. Miss Wheeler was as bad about them as Mother, and I think Grace was worst of all. I stood it just as long as I could, and then, in the middle of the afternoon of the 3rd day, I put up 2 fingers. Whoever built the privies at our schoolhouse dug the holes good and deep. When I came back to the schoolroom, I'd lost my glasses. Miss Wheeler had everybody stay after school and help me hunt for them, but we never found them anywhere. Before we could spare another $2.25, my eyes got better. Well, that is the end of chapter 15. I hope you guys are enjoying this story, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.